Hello again, everyone. Sorry for the last video that didn't have sound. This one should. Again, on this video, I am going to talk about ways to measure the required water mouth, house facing direction, and general incoming water via the use of satellite data. And this is the basic method I use when I am analyzing your place. Now, I've got a separate video that discusses finding your house's facing direction, and that's the overall facing direction of the house. And you determine that by looking at your roof line. But that is for San He Feng Shui. San He methods require the facing direction of the main door. That is what is used as the facing direction of the house. So it's a little different, but you will know with respect to your roof line what direction your door faces. That is it parallel to one of the edges of the roof line? Is it at 45 degrees? Is it at 90 degrees to the front, off to the side? You will know that in your house because you're there. So that is something you have to be cognizant of. You have to know this. Now, if you aren't really comfortable dealing with geometry, perhaps you can find someone else to help you. If you've got any friend with a kid or a kid yourself that has recently taken geometry, they should be able to follow this. It's not very difficult if you're comfortable with geometry. And by the way, I've never taken a geometry class in my life, but I did read a book, one of my dad's really old geometry books when I was a kid, and I basically learned everything I needed. Now, if you don't understand these directions and have nobody that can help, you need to hire somebody to do it, and it does not have to be me. Now, like I said, I do all my measurements within the computer, and I use a CAD program. The CAD program I use is a major overkill for the needs of this, but I also use this in my interior design practice and also in designing my houses. So this is useful for me in other ways, but you don't have to do a CAD program to be able to do this. You can do this with a printed image. So you can just print out your house's, the satellite view of your house to use this method. So basically, you do this with Google Maps. Now, there are some places that you can't get a true satellite view, and I'm actually going to show you one. And if that's the case, it's a lot more difficult, but it can still be done. If you are near enough to a river that you can see it, the effects will be much stronger than if you cannot. But the river has an effect on the entire neighborhood, whether or not you can actually see it, because the chi can wiggle its way through. It's just not as good a quality of chi, but it can do it. And if you can also see the water mouth, then that's very powerful. But not all houses will be able to see the water mouth. In fact, very few tend to be able to do this. So unless you have an extremely nearby river, you typically need to find your place's facing direction in a close-up view with a satellite. In this particular place, it's not the United States, I cannot get any more detailed of a view than this. There is no satellite imagery publicly available. I am 100% sure there is a satellite view out there. It's just not publicly available. But what the satellite does is it blocks out the buildings. And I'm sure there's an algorithm that does this. And, it's not done by hand. So I'm going to have to trust it in this case. And so the house I am looking at is this one right here. If you've printed it out and you haven't done anything to screw up the north-south direction that comes with Google Maps, any line that's parallel to the left or the right will always be the north-south, the UTM north-south direction in this location. And so you just draw a line alongside the edge of the house, and I've done that over here, and you can measure anywhere as long as these two lines would cross. You can measure, let's say this is 3 inches in, this, and then you measure again 3 inches here. You draw a straight line, and then you put the protractor over where those two meet. You know, where this line that runs alongside your wall and the north-south meet. And then you measure your direction. And you could either measure it this way, being 177, or you could measure it here, being 3 degrees. Either way, you're going to come up with the exact same answer, whether it's 360 minus 177 or 180 plus 3. It will always be the same, and that's a good way to check that you're doing this properly. Now, this happens to be in South 2 in the San Yuan system, and in the San He system, this will be in the horse because it's facing south. Now, that's not the real key, but this is what we have to do as one of the steps to find this direction. It is actually the main door, that how it is positioned with respect to the roof, that is not clear. And since I can't do a walkthrough here either, I really don't know what direction this door faces. But the people living there will know, so that'll be okay. And it makes a big difference in this particular case. If the door happens to face the road, we're going to have a much different reading than if the door faces to the right. Or if it faces to the left, then it's basically the same as facing towards the road in this particular case. And it'll be based on a case-by-case basis. And you'll see why in just a second. So I don't know which way this door faces. And I'll discuss that in a bit. Now, you also want to note you have a red marker that Google Maps puts on here. And you can see it's not even on this building. But it's also quite close. And this red marker can be used as long as you're zoomed out far enough that this difference in this distance is relatively small. Now, there is a way you can correct for this. Let's say this was a huge lot and the marker was way over here, several house distances away from the door. Then there is a method to use that can be used to fix this, but it's not easy. And I'm not going to show it here because it's even more difficult than what I am going to show. But I can deal with this. Most of the time, this isn't very necessary because there aren't really huge lots in most people's houses. So here's the overall general satellite view. We have a river coming in here, and we have another one coming from this side. Now there's a water mouth here, but this water mouth only serves this portion that is stuff on this side of the river. It does not cover here. It does not cover here. This water mouth only does here. This water mouth will serve this area and this area. This is where this very large river is, I believe, entering the ocean, but it could be a lake. It doesn't matter. And finding a water mouth when you have such a big river is a bit on the difficult side, especially if you cannot see a real satellite view. But when I zoom out a little farther, I determine that this is basically the coastline. So then I go to the center of the river along that coastline. And it's harder with a coastline. It's much easier with a river. I mean, you just kind of draw this and you draw this in the path of the river, and they're going to meet. And basically here, this is where these two meet. It's a lot easier with a river than where a river meets a larger body of water. But that is what we determine. And when it comes to the incoming water, if you're using the grow in and counter in method, it describes very clearly how to do it. But most of the other methods do not use that method. It uses something more like this. You want to look for a relatively straight stretch of the river that is heading in the general direction of the house. That's how I determine the incoming water. And I mean, if this river comes around this way, this is going to be the only spot. If it turns around someplace here, maybe comes here, well, maybe the incoming water could even be from here, but that's not the case. And if it's very far away, it doesn't really count. You want it relatively close to the house. The other thing is we can also, just by looking at this, look at the simple San He Chi. We've got a curve this way, and then we've got a curve this way. This curve here is very good for the buildings and houses and businesses that are located in this direction or in this section of the river. It's not as good here, but this one, it's much better on this side than it is on this side. So overall, this doesn't have the greatest San just by the simplest part of the San analysis. But that doesn't mean it doesn't receive Qi. We have to do a little more analysis. But once I get to this stage, then step 2 starts. If you be able to determine this direction, the direction of the water mouth from your main door, that direction is what determines which of the 4 elemental structures you must use. In this case, it happens to be a metal structure. When I get to the stage in the computer, I usually hide the satellite image. In this case, I didn't absolutely need to because it's much simpler. But when you have a true satellite image, you've got darks and lights, and it's very hard to read. When you print it out, it's a lot less difficult because when you print something out, it's a lot less intense than when you have it on the screen. But I always hide it so I can see these things very clearly. So we have the incoming water, we have the house facing, and we have the water mouth direction. Now you notice I have 2 norths here. Any direction that's parallel to these 2 sides is UTM north. And my calculator says that you have to add less than 0.2 degrees. Now if you're using a protractor, you can't usually read to this accuracy. And in this case, everything is close enough to the center of its relative box that I don't need to worry about this measurement. And this is quite small, but it can be almost 3 degrees. So some houses it's more important than others. But this is something that you do need to know. Once I get that done, I do some measurements. Now I'm going to show you these 2 separately in close-up so you can actually read what's going on. So here we have the water mouth at 23 degrees from UTM north. And any water mouth that's between 15 and 105, you must use the metal structure. And I'll show you a table in just a bit. Again, we have our houses facing direction. And here's the incoming water. And you might actually have maybe some difficulty to know which number to add. There's a pretty easy way to figure this out. We have north here, east is to the right, south is down, west is to the left. If it's between the north and the east, it's got to be between 0 and 90 degrees. So if the direction was this way, we would know where it has to be. If it's between the east and the south, it has to be between 90 and 180. Between south and west, it has to be 180 to 270. And between west and north, which is what we have here, it has to be between 270 and 360. So we can figure this out, and we know we're getting this right because it's in the right range. And sometimes that can be a little confusing, so this is another good check. So this is basically the step-by-step way of doing it. First, you get your location of your building and use the calculator to find the correction. Now, this correction must be applied to all directional measurements. So in this case, we have 3 measurements. If the correction in this case had been big enough, we add that to all of them, or subtract it if that's what the directions say. But in our case, it would be add. Then you use the satellite's view to measure the building facing. And then by noting the general orientation of your main door with your overall building, you determine your main door facing direction. And that's the important thing. And you will find out which of the 24 mountains that direction lies. And that's important. And in this case, remember we had in 183, if the door is facing the road, it would also have a 183. If it's facing to the east, it would have a 93. If it's facing to the west, it would have a 273. So, that's at 90 degrees, of course. And if it was at 45, then you just subtract 45 from that 180 or add it, depending which direction it's tilted. Then you find the water mouth measurement, and you want to measure from the center of the main door. Sometime it has to be estimated. Depends on how far that dot is from your main door. In this case, we were zoomed out far enough that the difference isn't going to make any difference because we really had to zoom out to see everything. And then you would find the 24 mountain sector for that water mouth. And then you use this chart. Depending on which sector, or if you want to stick with degrees, that's fine. That determines which one of these you have to use. And you have no choice. You can't pick a different one. You have to use this information. Once you have that done, then you look at the direction and the sector of the incoming water. And like I said, this can often be the hardest thing to determine, and it might require you to zoom out fairly far to see it, but you can do this. And sometimes you have to have a certain scale of zooming for your water mouth and a different one for the incoming water. And if that's the way it is, that's the way it is. It's fine. The next thing you need to do is you need to stand outside the building, even if you just do it in your mind, and face the river. And it doesn't matter whether or not you can see it, you basically know where your river is coming from. And if the river enters from the right and exits at the left, which is what we have here, you need to use the counterclockwise 12th chi cycle ring. And I have, already given these things to you. And if the river enters from the left and exits to the right, you need to use the clockwise 12 chi cycle ring. Now the buildings on the right side, that is on the east side of the river, of the big main river, those would be using this one because the river would enter from the left, exit to the right. Now there are some San He methods that only use the clockwise 12 chi cycle. And so that means that our house, which has to use this, can't use those methods. The other thing is, this particular house will not receive San He Chi, at least the stuff that is in chapters 2 and 3 of the Water Everywhere book, unless the door happens to face eastward. And that's basically because water needs to pass in front of that main door for you to receive San He Chi. That's one of the keys to knowing how to apply San He. And unfortunately, if it's not that way, you won't receive it, but you can often move your main door, and it might be worth it. So that's basically it. I'd like to thank you for watching. Please feel free to contact me here if you have any questions, or visit my ad-free website for more information, including the calculator. And I also have that video telling you how to do this on my website, how to do your facing direction of your house, that is. I'd like to thank you again for watching.